William Hayes reached for the glass doors of his own tower. A small hand grabbed his sleeve. He turned, irritated. He expected a random child. Instead, he found Caleb, 8 years old, silent for 3 years, staring straight into his eyes. Voss screamed for security to remove the trash from the lobby. Caleb ignored him completely. Then the boy spoke for the first time in years. "Don't move," he said. "Follow me." Hayes froze. Something in that voice, in that scar-matching wrist, in that unbearable certainty stopped him cold. Hey, it's your host, and this story wrecked me the first time I read it. If you've ever needed one person to just listen, stay with me. This one earns it. Subscribe because the next 10 minutes will change how you see silence.
Wait, he just threw away the only warning. Let's see what happens.
The lobby of Hayes Tower smelled of fresh paint and new money, marble floors, glass walls, gold trim on every door. Gregory Voss walked through it like he owned the air itself, shoulders back, chin high. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the stone. Behind him, 2 junior staffers hurried to keep pace, folders pressed to their chests. Voss did not look at them. He never did. At the far end of the lobby, an older man knelt beside a mop bucket. Samuel. Once an architect, now a janitor. Gray uniform, calloused hands, eyes fixed on the floor. Beside him stood his son, 8 years old. Still. Silent. Watching. Caleb did not fidget. He did not look away. In his hands he held a worn notebook, its pages soft from years of folding. Voss crossed the lobby without slowing down. He passed the bucket. Then, without warning, he kicked it. Dirty water sprayed across the marble. It soaked Samuel's knees. It soaked his shoes. The staffers froze. Somewhere near the elevators, a woman gasped and covered her mouth. Voss did not apologize. He looked down at Samuel, calm, amused, entirely unbothered. "Clean it up, Samuel," he paused. "And next time, don't look at me when I pass." Samuel said nothing. He reached for the mop. His hands were shaking. He began wiping the water from the floor on his knees. Not angry, not pleading, just quiet, worn down, and obedient in the exact way the building demanded of him. Caleb did not move. He had not spoken a single word in 3 years. Not since the night Voss stood in a courtroom and called his father a liar. Not since the drawings his father made calculations load charts. Entire staircases of numbers were quietly folded into another man's portfolio. Caleb remembered none of the speeches. He remembered one sound, his father's voice breaking. Once. Never again. Voss glanced at the boy, bored already moving on. Caleb lifted the notebook. He held it up with both hands directly in Voss's line of sight. The cover was cracked, inside page after page of measurements. Tiny handwriting, red ink circling numbers that did not belong on any safety report Voss had ever signed. One page stood apart from the rest, a jagged red X drawn hard enough to tear the paper beneath it. Voss stopped. For a moment, nobody breathed. The staffers watched silent, complicit. Samuel stayed on his knees, water soaked through denim. He was too afraid to lift his head. Somewhere behind them, all unseen in the shadow of a support column, William Hayes stood watching everything unfold. Voss snatched the notebook from Caleb's hands. He did not ask what it meant. He did not need to. Men like Voss had one instinct above all others. Anything that threatened his comfort deserved to disappear. He tore the marked page free. Slow, deliberate. He savored it. Then he crumpled it into a fist. "Know your place." His voice dropped low, quiet, almost gentle. "Both of you." He dropped the crumpled page into the floor grate beside him. He kicked it once. It vanished into the dark below, swallowed by the ventilation system, gone before Samuel could even lift his eyes. Voss straightened his jacket. He smoothed one sleeve. He walked on, already forgetting the boy's face. Caleb did not cry. He watched the grate. He watched the exact spot where his warning had disappeared. Something in his posture went still. Very quiet. Very deliberate. Not defeated. Counting. Samuel finished the floor in silence. His knees were raw. His son stood beside him, saying nothing, offering nothing but presence. A janitor and his mute child. Invisible to a lobby full of people who had somewhere important to be. Only one man had not moved on. William Hayes stood near the column for a long moment after Voss disappeared into the elevator bank. He did not know the boy's name. He did not know what the red X had marked. He did not know why a child would hold up a torn notebook to a man 3 times his size without a flicker of fear. He only knew that something about the boy's stillness had reached somewhere old in him, somewhere he usually kept locked away. He turned. He walked toward the doors, his coat trailing behind him, cold, expensive, and entirely unaware. Behind him, deep inside the walls of the tower, he had spent 3 years building a single page of drafting paper drifted through dark ductwork, past dust, past silence, toward a place no report would ever reach. Hayes did not look back. He had no reason to. He did not know that the boy behind him had already started counting the seconds until the building he loved most would begin quietly to fail. Emily watched from the reception desk, pretending to type, her eyes moving between the retreating billionaire and the kneeling janitor. She had seen Voss humiliate people before. She had never seen a child stand that still while it happened. She said nothing. She had learned in 2 years at Hayes Tower exactly when silence was survival. By the time the elevator doors closed behind Voss, the lobby had already gone back to pretending nothing had happened. Marble gleamed. Water dried. A janitor folded his mop against the bucket and stood slow, his back stiff with age and something heavier than age. His son slipped a hand into his small fingers around a calloused palm, and neither of them said a word as they walked toward the service door together. William Hayes returned to the lobby 2 days later with his assistant beside him. Emily walked half a step behind. A tablet sat in her hands, numbers scrolling faster than most people could read. She talked projections, budget overruns, Phase 2 funding. Hayes nodded along, his eyes moving across the marble, the columns, the polished surfaces that had cost more than most people's homes. Then he saw the boy again. Caleb stood near the east wall alone, tracing his fingers along a seam in the marble, not playing, not wandering the way children usually did in wide-open spaces. He moved with purpose, step by step, counting floor tiles under his breath in a rhythm only he understood. Hayes slowed. Emily kept talking for 3 more sentences before she noticed he had stopped listening. She followed his gaze to the boy. She had seen him before, always near his father, always quiet, always somewhere in the background of a building that did not seem to notice him at all. "Sir," she said. Hayes did not answer. He watched Caleb press his palm flat against a support column, then his ear, listening to something buried deep inside the concrete. The boy's face did not change. No fear, no curiosity, nothing performative. Just focus, total and unblinking. "That's the janitor's son," Emily said, quiet now, careful. "He doesn't speak. Hasn't in years, from what I hear." Hayes said nothing. He was rubbing his own wrist thumb, moving over an old scar hidden beneath his cuff, a habit he was rarely aware of doing. He had not touched that scar in months. Something about the boy's stillness had reached for it without asking. Caleb moved to the next column, then the next. Each time the same ritual, palm first, then ear, then a pause long enough to feel deliberate. He was not exploring. He was measuring something, mapping something the rest of the building refused to see. "Mr. Hayes," Emily tried again. "The Q3 numbers." "In a minute." He crossed the lobby toward the boy. His coat trailed behind him. His footsteps were slow, unusually quiet for a man who normally filled a room the moment he entered it. Caleb did not turn to look at him. He kept listening to the column, his small hand flat against stone that had 3 years ago cost this company a fortune to pour. "What are you doing?" Hayes asked. No answer. He had not expected one. He crouched, bringing himself down to the boy's height. Nobody in this lobby had likely done that for Caleb in a long time. Up close, the boy's eyes were sharp-focused, entirely unafraid of a man worth more than most cities. Caleb studied him for a long moment. Then he pointed. One finger, straight down toward the floor, toward the foundation buried somewhere beneath the marble. Hayes followed the gesture. He saw nothing but stone. "Down there," he asked. "What's down there?" Caleb only stared at him, unreadable patient, waiting for a question the billionaire had not yet learned how to ask. Then he turned and walked away. He pressed his palm to the next column as though the conversation had already ended. Hayes stood slowly. Something in his chest had shifted, small but undeniable. The way a single crack shifts the balance of an entire wall before anyone notices it spreading. Emily approached, uncertain. "Everything all right?" "Pull the structural reports." Hayes did not look at her. "The raw ones, not the summaries Voss sends up." She hesitated. "Voss handles all of that directly. He said the board prefers a single point of—" "I don't care what Voss prefers." Emily wrote it down without another word. Her eyes lingered on Hayes a moment longer than usual, the way someone watches a man notice for the first time a fire that has been burning quietly for years. Across the lobby, Caleb reached the final column near the service corridor. He pressed his ear against it. He closed his eyes. He held perfectly still. Beneath his palms, so faint that no adult in that lobby would have caught it, something in the concrete gave the smallest shift. A whisper of movement, buried deep, patient, waiting its turn. He opened his eyes. He had felt that same shift 3 columns ago, and the one before that. A pattern nobody else in the building had bothered to notice, hidden in plain sight beneath their expensive shoes. Caleb glanced once toward the billionaire, now speaking low and urgent to his assistant phone already in hand. Then he turned back to the wall. He traced the seam again with 2 fingers, slow, certain, and entirely alone in what he now knew. The elevator chimed somewhere behind him. Voices rose near the front desk, laughter from a group of investors passing through, on a tour that had nothing to do with concrete or cracks or dying buildings. Nobody in that crowd looked twice at a silent boy touching a wall. Nobody ever did. Caleb did not need them to. He pulled the notebook from his jacket, the one Voss had not fully emptied, and pressed it flat against his knee. With a stub of pencil, he sketched a rough map of the columns he had checked, marking each one with a small dot. 4 dots so far. 4 columns that hummed the same wrong note beneath his palm. He would find the rest before the week was out. The silence in this building, he understood, was not peace. It was a lie, and it was running out of time. The sub-basement was off limits after 10 at night. Samuel knew the rule. He broke it anyway. Flashlight, low footsteps, careful against raw concrete that had never seen marble or gold trim. Down here, the building stopped pretending. Down here, it was just steel dust and the columns holding up everything above. He found column 12 near the east stairwell. He ran his palm along its surface, slow searching. Then he stopped. A hairline crack. Then another beside it, branching, spreading in a pattern he had seen only once before 3 years ago, in a building that no longer existed. His flashlight shook slightly in his hand. He pulled a small ruler from his pocket and measured the width. He wrote the number on his palm ink, smudging against calloused skin because he no longer trusted himself with paper Voss could take. Samuel. He froze. Gary stood at the base of the stairwell, arms crossed, a flashlight of his own aimed at the floor rather than at Samuel's face. Kind in his own tired way. Complicit in every way that mattered. "You're not supposed to be down here." "Gary, look at this." Samuel pointed at the crack. His voice was low and urgent. It shook with something closer to grief than fear. "This isn't settling. This is failure. I've seen this exact pattern before." Gary's jaw tightened. "Samuel." 3 days, maybe less. Samuel stepped closer, ruler still in hand. You halt pores on this section. You bring in an independent inspector. You do it now before someone gets hurt. From the shadows near the stairwell, unseen by either man, Caleb watched his father plead. He had followed him down silent as always. He pressed himself against the wall where the dark swallowed him whole. Gary rubbed his face. I can't just halt a pour because a janitor found a crack. I used to design buildings like this one. Samuel's voice cracked just slightly. I know what a crack like this means. You used to. Gary's tone was not cruel. It was worse. It was pity. That was a long time ago, Samuel. A door opened above them. Footsteps descended the stairwell, unhurried, expensive shoes against raw concrete that did not belong to a man like Gregory Voss. What, Voss said, is going on down here? Gary straightened immediately. Nothing, sir. Just a routine check. Voss's eyes moved to Samuel, then to the ruler in his hand, then to the faint numbers inked across his palm. Something like amusement crossed his face. Measuring cracks now, are we? Voss stepped closer, unbothered, almost delighted. Tell me, Samuel, since you clearly still fancy yourself an architect, what psi rating was specified for this pour? 5,000, Samuel said. It should be 5,000. 5,000. Voss smiled thin and certain. This batch tested at 4,100, within acceptable tolerance for a structure of this class according to every engineer I've paid to say so. He said it lightly, proudly even. A number he clearly believed made him sound thorough rather than guilty. That's not within tolerant, Samuel said. That's 900 short. That's not your concern anymore. Voss's voice dropped cold, now final. You lost the right to have opinions about concrete the day this company decided your name meant liability. He turned to Gary. If I hear one more word about a disgraced, crazy janitor wandering into restricted areas and inventing structural fantasies, I will personally see to it that you're replaced by someone who understands where his paycheck comes from. Are we clear? Gary's throat moved. Yes, sir. Good. Voss straightened his jacket. Sign off on the section. Log tonight as a routine inspection. Nothing more. Gary did not look at Samuel again. He pulled a clipboard from under his arm, uncapped a pen, and signed his name beneath a line that would soon call 4,100 psi secure enough to hold 100 floors of glass and steel. Voss walked back toward the stairwell without another glance at either man, already forgetting the exchange, already certain he had won something. Samuel stood alone beside the crack, the ruler still in his hand, useless now, against a signature that outweighed every measurement he could take. He pressed his palm flat against the concrete one last time, feeling the faint tremor beneath it, the one only he and his son seemed able to hear. Then he turned away, shoulders low, and climbed the stairs without a word. In the shadows, Caleb had heard everything. The number, the signature, the tell in Voss's voice when he said tolerance like it meant something other than danger. He memorized all of it the way he memorized everything now silent, exact, permanent. His father had tried the adult way. Words pleading 90 seconds of dignity spent against a man who would never listen. It hadn't worked. Caleb slipped further into the dark toward the column, toward the crack his father had just measured and lost. He knelt beside it, ran 2 fingers along the fracture the way his father had taught him years ago, back when teaching him things like this was still allowed. He had watched his father follow the rules his whole life. Tonight, quietly in the dark, beneath a building that was already dying, Caleb decided he was done following them too. The penthouse boardroom sat 40 floors above the lobby where Samuel still mopped water off marble, glass walls, a long table of dark wood. Voss stood at the head of it, a laser pointer in hand, a slide projected behind him that showed nothing but green numbers and confident graphs. Ahead of schedule, Voss clicked to the next slide. Under budget, every safety benchmark cleared with room to spare. Hayes sat across the table, arms folded, saying nothing yet. Emily sat beside him, tablet open, taking notes she suspected nobody would actually read. Voss kept talking. Phase 2 funding. Investor confidence. A tone in his voice like a man reciting a speech he had given a dozen times before, polished smooth by repetition. The board will be thrilled, Voss said. This tower is a monument to efficient execution. Hayes said nothing for a long moment. He was thinking of a boy pressing his palm against a column, listening for something the rest of the building refused to hear. I want the raw engineering data, Hayes said, not the summary. The foundation reports unfiltered. The room went quiet. Voss's smile did not falter. Something behind it shifted quick and controlled. With respect, sir, that data is highly technical. My engineering team compresses it for exactly this reason, so leadership can focus on strategy, not spreadsheets. I don't need it compressed. It would take days to compile in a format that made sense outside the engineering division. Voss spread his hands, easy and reasonable. We call it value engineering internally, optimizing materials without compromising safety. It's standard practice at this scale. Emily's pen stopped moving. She glanced at Hayes, then back at Voss, saying nothing, watching the deflection happen in real time. Optimizing materials, Hayes repeated. Every tower this size makes adjustments, Voss said. Cost efficiencies. It's how the industry survives margin pressure. Anyone who tells you otherwise has never actually built anything. He let the comment land. It was a small jab aimed somewhere below him at every janitor and foreman and disgraced architect who had ever questioned a number on his desk. There was a man on this project once, Voss continued, almost fond, almost nostalgic, talented actually. Before he let his own ego convince him he knew better than an entire engineering team. Ended up costing lives instead of saving them. Hayes's jaw tightened. You're talking about Samuel. I'm talking about a pattern, Voss shrugged. Overconfidence dressed up as expertise. It happens more than you'd think in this business. Emily kept her eyes on the table. Hayes rubbed his wrist thumb, pressing against the scar beneath his cuff without realizing he had done it again. Something about the way Voss said overconfidence made his stomach tighten, though he could not yet name why. I want a third-party audit, Hayes said. Independent structural review before I sign anything further. For the first time, Voss's composure cracked just slightly, a flicker gone almost before it appeared. An audit would delay Phase 2 by months. Voss's tone sharpened. Investors are already anxious. If word gets out that Hayes Tower needs outside verification, you'll spook the entire funding round. Is that really the message you want to send? Hayes hesitated. Every number in this report has been signed off, Voss pressed. By licensed engineers, by your own foreman. This isn't guesswork, sir. This is documented, verified, and entirely within code. He slid a folder across the table. Thick, official, stamped with signatures that meant nothing beyond a foreman's fear of losing his job. Hayes opened it. Pages of numbers, technical language initials at the bottom of every section. It looked on its surface exactly like competence. He thought of the boy again. The 4 dots in a cracked notebook. The way Caleb had pointed down toward the foundation without a single word. Then he thought of the funding round. The investors. The reputation he had spent decades building, one that could not survive a public rumor of instability, warranted or not. Fine, Hayes said. Phase 2 proceeds. He picked up the pen. Voss had already placed it beside the contract, waiting. Voss's smile widened, careful not to show too much. Hayes signed. The pen moved fast, practiced the signature of a man who had signed 1,000 contracts and trusted mostly out of habit that this one was no different. Excellent decision, Voss said. You won't regret it. Emily watched the ink settle into the page. She had seen Voss deflect uncomfortable questions before, always smooth, always confident, always exactly persuasive enough. She said nothing. She simply noted the date quietly in the corner of her own private file. Voss gathered his slides. He was already moving on to the next meeting, already certain the matter was closed. Hayes stayed seated a moment longer, staring at his own signature at the folder full of numbers he had not actually verified himself. The ink dried slowly on the page. Neither man in that room understood yet what it had actually signed. Somewhere below them, 40 floors down, a crack was widening by the hour, patient silent and entirely unconcerned with contracts. Rain started just after 6 thin at first, then heavier drumming against the dumpsters lined up behind the service entrance. The shift had run long. Samuel's back ached from hours bent over floors nobody else would ever kneel to clean. His hands were raw chapped from bleach and cold water, but the paycheck folded twice inside his jacket pocket had made the day bearable. Enough for rent, enough for groceries, enough barely to keep going another 2 weeks. Caleb walked beside him in silence, backpack slung over one shoulder, waiting by the door the way he always did at the end of a shift. He watched the rain fall against the loading dock, counting drops, the way he counted everything patient exact, undisturbed by the cold soaking through his sneakers. Voss was waiting for them. He stood beneath the awning dry, dressed in a coat that cost more than Samuel's monthly rent, arms-crossed patient, in the way predators are patient. "Samuel," Voss's voice was almost pleasant. "We need to talk." Samuel stopped walking. Caleb stopped beside him, small fingers curling into the hem of his father's jacket. "You were in the sub-basement." Voss stepped forward out from under the awning, letting the rain hit his shoulders without flinching. "Restricted area, after hours. Harassing my foreman with fantasies about cracks that don't exist." "They exist." Samuel's voice was steady barely. "I measured them myself." "You're fired," Voss said it lightly, almost bored the way a man dismisses a waiter. "Effective immediately. Don't bother coming back for your locker." Samuel's shoulders dropped. "Please." The word came out before he could stop it. Rain soaked through his collar. "We'll be homeless by morning. I have a son." "You should have thought of that," Voss said, "before you decided you still knew how to read a blueprint." He pulled the folded paycheck from Samuel's jacket pocket without asking, quick and casual, the way a man takes something that was never really his to keep. Samuel reached for it. "That's mine. I earned that." Voss held it just out of reach. "Did you?" He tore it. Once. Then again. Then let the pieces fall into a puddle at Samuel's feet, ink already bleeding into rainwater. Samuel stared at the pieces. He did not move. Caleb's grip tightened on his father's jacket. "You never learned your place." Voss stepped closer, lowering his voice, almost gentle now, almost intimate in his cruelty. "Neither did your boy, apparently." Samuel's head came up. "Leave him out of this. If you two aren't off this property by morning," Voss said, "I'll make one phone call. Child Protective Services, unstable housing, unemployed father, mute neglected child wandering a construction site unsupervised." Samuel's face went pale. "You wouldn't. Try me." Rain fell harder now, soaking through Samuel's uniform, through Caleb's thin jacket, through everything either of them had left. Voss watched them both for a long moment, satisfied, unhurried, already turning to leave. "Vanish tonight," he said, "or I take the boy myself." He walked away without looking back, his shoes clicking against wet pavement, disappearing around the corner of the building. Samuel dropped to his knees in the puddle, torn paper, dirty water, his son's hand still gripping his sleeve. He thought of the apartment they would lose by morning, the eviction notice already taped to a door he would never open again, the shelters that turned families away when the beds ran out. That happened almost every night by 9 most of the time. He thought of Caleb, of school forms with no address to write, of a system that took children first and asked questions never. He did not cry. He could not yet, not with Caleb watching. He simply knelt there, rain streaming down his face, indistinguishable now from anything else. Caleb sat down beside him, small shoulders, silent, shaking. He did not speak. He never spoke. But his face, for the first time in 3 years, broke completely, tears mixing with rain, until there was no difference between them at all. Samuel pulled his son into his arms. He held him there in the alley, in the cold, in the wreckage of everything Voss had just taken. No home, no job, no paycheck. Nothing left but each other kneeling in a puddle behind a tower. Neither of them would ever be allowed inside again. "I'm sorry," Samuel whispered. "I'm so sorry." Caleb pressed his face into his father's shoulder. Neither of them moved for a long time. Then beneath them the ground shifted. Not much. A single tremor, low and deep, rolling up through the pavement and into their knees. Distant, muffled wrong, the kind of sound a building makes only once before it makes it again louder. Samuel went still. Caleb lifted his head. Above them, the tower rose 40 stories into the storm-lit gold from 100 windows, indifferent to the two figures kneeling in its shadow. Somewhere inside, an elevator chimed. Somewhere inside, a phone rang unanswered on a desk belonging to a man who had just signed away every warning that mattered. Somewhere far below their feet, deep inside the foundation, Voss had signed off as secure something had just moved that was never supposed to move at all.
Hold on. Voss just fired Samuel and threatened to take Caleb away. If that were me, I would have lost my mind. Imagine standing powerless while the man who stole your life threatens your child. This changes everything.
By midnight, the rain had stopped, leaving the alley slick and silver under a single flickering lamp. Samuel knelt beside their few belongings, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag with hands that would not stop shaking. A spare shirt, a photograph, the torn corners of a paycheck he could not bring himself to throw away. He zipped the bag halfway. Then he stopped staring at the wet pavement where the pieces of that paycheck still floated in a shallow puddle. 3 years of scraping together enough to keep a roof over his son's head gone, in the time it took a rich man to tear paper in half. "We'll find somewhere," he said, more to himself than to Caleb. "We always do." Caleb did not move. He stood at the mouth of the alley, staring back toward the tower, its windows still lit against the dark sky. Something in his stillness had changed since the tremor. Sharper now, certain. "Come on." Samuel zipped the bag and stood. "We need to go before he sees us again." Caleb turned and ran, not away, toward the tower. "Caleb!" Samuel dropped the bag. He chased after him, his knees aching, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. Rain-slick pavement. A locked service gate Caleb somehow slipped through before Samuel could catch it. By the time Samuel reached the lobby doors, his son had already vanished inside. A security guard stepped forward near the entrance. "Sir, you can't." "That's my son," Samuel said, breathless. "He just ran in there." The guard hesitated, radio already rising to his mouth. Inside, Caleb moved through the lobby like he had memorized every inch of it because he had. 3 years of watching counting mapping every column and corridor, while adults talked over his head as though he were furniture. He knew which hallway led to the elevator bank. He knew which door the security office used for its blind spot. He ducked past a rolling cart of folded linens. He slipped behind a marble pillar as 2 guards swept past. Radios crackled. Flashlights swept the wrong direction entirely. Nobody looked down. Nobody ever did. He reached the main lobby just as the elevator chimed. William Hayes stepped out, coat over one arm, phone pressed to his ear, already halfway through a sentence about tomorrow's schedule. Behind him, Emily followed with a folder of documents, her heels clicking fast against the marble. The glass exit doors were 30 feet away. Caleb's chest tightened. He had one chance. One window before the doors closed, and the billionaire disappeared into a car that would take him somewhere Caleb could never reach again. He ran, past the velvet ropes marking off the reception area, past a startled staffer reaching out too late to stop him, straight toward the man who did not yet know he was the only person left who might listen. "Sir, wait," Emily started. Hayes lowered his phone, frowning at the sudden commotion. "What is—" Caleb planted himself directly in front of him, small, soaked from the rain, still clinging to his jacket, breathing hard from the run chest, rising and falling, eyes locked on the billionaire's face without a flicker of hesitation. Hayes stopped walking. For a moment, neither of them moved. Security guards closed in from both sides, hands already reaching radios, crackling with confused instructions. Emily stepped closer, uncertain whether to intervene or wait. "It's the janitor's boy," she said quietly. "From the lobby a few days ago." Hayes studied Caleb's face. The same stillness. The same unblinking focus he remembered from the columns, from the wall, from a small hand pointing down toward a foundation Hayes had not thought about since signing that contract. "Sir, I can have him removed," a guard offered, stepping forward. "Wait." Hayes held up a hand without looking away from Caleb. Behind them, the lobby doors swung open. Samuel burst through, chest-heaving, eyes wide with panic as he searched the room and found his son standing directly in front of William Hayes. "Caleb," Samuel's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, sir. He doesn't usually—" Caleb reached out and grabbed Hayes by the sleeve. The guards tensed. Emily's breath caught. Hayes did not pull away. He looked down at the small hand gripping his coat, then up at the boy's face, at eyes that held something no 8-year-old should carry alone. Something urgent, something that had been trying to speak for 3 years and had finally run out of patience for silence. Caleb planted his feet. He inhaled slow and deliberate, his whole body bracing for something he had not done since the night his father's voice broke in a courtroom and his own voice had simply stopped. The lobby went quiet. Even the guards seemed to sense it, hands frozen halfway to the boy's shoulder, waiting for whatever was about to happen next. Somewhere behind the reception desk, a phone began to ring, unanswered, its sound swallowed by the silence pressing down on the room. Nobody moved to pick it up. Nobody dared to break whatever was building between the boy and the billionaire. Samuel stood frozen by the doors, rain still dripping from his jacket, watching his son do something he had not seen in 3 long years. Caleb opened his mouth. "Don't move." The words came out rough, unpracticed, 3 years unused, but clear. Hayes froze. "Follow me." Nobody in the lobby breathed. A guard's hand stopped halfway to his radio. Emily's mouth fell open, the folder slipping slightly in her grip. Samuel stared at his son, tears already forming, unable to speak a single word himself. Hayes looked down at the boy, gripping his sleeve. Something cold moved through him, sharp and immediate, the kind of recognition that has nothing to do with memory and everything to do with instinct. The boy had a voice, and he had chosen, after 3 years of silence, to spend his first words on this. "Sir, I heard shouting." Voss's voice cut across the lobby, loud, urgent, already performing outrage for whoever might be watching. "Security, get this trash out of the building immediately." He strode toward them, ties slightly loose, breathing hard from the stairs. "This child does not belong here," Voss continued. "Neither does his father. I fired the man myself tonight for trespassing." Caleb did not let go of Hayes's sleeve. He did not even look at Voss. His eyes stayed fixed on the billionaire, waiting patient, entirely unmoved by the man shouting behind him. "William, I apologize for this disturbance." Voss forced a smile, too wide, too fast. "I'll have him removed. You shouldn't have to deal with—" "Stop!" Hayes said it quietly. It landed harder than shouting ever could. Voss stopped. Hayes was still staring at the boy, at the scar-like intensity in his eyes, at a stillness that reminded him uncomfortably of standing at his own father's funeral at 8 years old, with nobody willing to explain what a support beam failure actually meant. He rubbed his wrist without realizing it. The scar beneath his sleeve had never fully faded. "Take me," he said. Caleb turned and walked. Hayes followed without another word. He ignored Voss's protests, ignored the guards, still frozen in confusion, ignored Emily's rapid attempt to keep pace behind him with her folder and her questions. Caleb led him past the elevators, through a service door marked restricted, down a stairwell that grew colder and darker with every step. The air changed as they descended. Marble gave way to raw concrete. The smell of fresh paint gave way to something damper, older, closer to the bones of the building than anyone upstairs ever had reason to notice. Caleb moved through it without hesitation. Small footsteps, steady on stairs he had clearly walked before, more than once more than he had ever told anyone. "William, this is completely unnecessary," Voss called after them, following now, his composure fraying at the edges. "The boy is clearly disturbed. His father put these ideas in his head. It's exactly the kind of unstable behavior I warned the board about." Caleb did not slow down. He led Hayes past the same columns his father had measured, past the crack Voss had signed off as tolerance, past 4 small dots inked into a notebook now proven true beneath their feet. He stopped at column 12. He pressed Hayes's hand flat against the concrete. Hayes felt it immediately, a vibration faint but constant running through stone that should never move at all. His stomach dropped. "That's nothing." Voss's voice had climbed an octave, settling. "Every new structure settles. It's completely within tolerance. I've told you this already. The report's all confirmed." "You told me 4,100 psi," Hayes said, not looking at him, "was within tolerance." Voss's mouth opened, closed. "You said it yourself." Hayes finally turned to face him. "In this building, to Samuel, in front of witnesses." Something in Voss's expression cracked just slightly, the polish finally slipping. "That is not what I said," Voss began. "That's not accurate. That number was preliminary. I never confirmed final." "You confirmed it to me an hour ago in the boardroom." Silence. Caleb watched the exchange with no visible satisfaction, no vindication, nothing but quiet attention, the same patience he had shown every column in this building for 3 straight years. Hayes crouched beside the crack, running his fingers along it the way Samuel once had. It was wider now, wider than it had been a week ago, wider than any tolerance could reasonably explain. "You told me to know your place," Hayes said quietly, almost to himself. "That's what you told Samuel. That's what you told this boy." He stood. "You should have taken your own advice." Voss said nothing. Hayes pulled out his phone, hands steady despite everything churning beneath his composed exterior. Behind him, Emily arrived at the bottom of the stairwell, breathless, taking in the scene, the crack, the silence, the billionaire staring down a man who had just run out of excuses. "Get me every structural report from the last 3 years, Hayes said into the phone. "The real ones. And find Samuel. Tell him his son just saved this building." Caleb finally looked up at him. For the first time in 3 years, something close to relief moved across the boy's face, quiet and small, but real. He had carried this warning alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be believed. Behind him, the crack in column 12 sat exposed under the stairwell light. Patient and undeniable, no longer a secret buried beneath tolerance reports and signatures nobody had bothered to question. Caleb pulled away from Hayes's side and moved toward the ventilation grate near the base of the stairwell. He knelt. He worked his fingers through the metal slats, reaching into the dark the way he had done in his mind 100 times since the night Voss kicked a torn page into the dust below. The grate was cold under his palms, rusted at the edges exactly where memory had told him it would be. "What is he doing?" Voss said, sharp now, watching from the bottom step. Nobody answered him. Caleb's fingers found paper. He pulled it free, slowly, careful not to tear it further than it already was. Dust clung to the edges. Water damage had softened one corner, but the red mark still held jagged and unmistakable exactly where he had drawn it 3 years and 1 lifetime ago. He stood and carried it to Hayes. He pressed the page flat against the crack in column 12, lining the red X precisely over the widest point of the fracture, the way he had measured it a dozen times in his notebook, without anyone believing him. Hayes stared at it. The match was exact, not close, exact. "That's impossible," Voss said, though his voice had lost most of its certainty. "That page means nothing. A child's drawing. You can't build a case out of crayon marks." "It's ink," Emily said quietly, still holding her folder. "And it matches the exact coordinates in the original engineering plans. I pulled them an hour ago." Voss turned toward her. "You had no authorization to—" "I work for him," Emily nodded toward Hayes. "Not for you." Voss's jaw tightened. He stepped forward closer to Hayes, now his tone shifting, softening into something almost pleading. "William, listen to me. Whatever this looks like, I can explain every piece of it. The material costs were rising, the margins were thin. I made adjustments any developer would have made under the same pressure." "You mean you cut corners?" Hayes said. "I mean I kept this project alive." Voss's voice cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what it costs to build something this size? Samuel would have bankrupted this company chasing perfection nobody could afford." Samuel measured a crack, Hayes said. You measured a bribe. Voss's face went pale. That man is unstable, Voss said faster now, reaching for anything solid. Everyone knows his history. The last building he touched collapsed under his watch. Ask anyone. Ask the board. He's the reason we require independent inspections in the first place. Hayes went still. That building collapsed, Hayes said slowly, because someone falsified the concrete ratings, the same way you just falsified mine. Voss said nothing. I read the old file, Hayes continued, before I signed anything. Samuel raised concerns 3 weeks before that collapse. In writing. Someone buried them. That was never proven, Voss said. It will be now. Hayes rubbed his wrist thumb, pressing against the scar hidden beneath his cuff. He had not spoken about that scar in 15 years, not to reporters, not to investors, not even to Emily. His father had died in a construction accident when Hayes was 12, a support failure covered up by a company that valued its timeline over a dozen lives working the site that morning. Hayes had spent half his fortune since then trying to build things that would never do to another family what had been done to his. He looked at Caleb. The boy had not moved, still holding the torn page steady against the crack, waiting the way he had waited 3 years for someone to finally listen. I understand you, Hayes said quietly to Caleb alone, more than you know. Caleb held his gaze and said nothing but something in his shoulders, finally loosened just slightly for the first time since the lobby. Hayes turned back to Voss. You're done here. William, be reasonable. I'm locking down this tower. Hayes lifted his phone. Every entrance, every elevator, nobody in or out without my authorization. He dialed. This is William Hayes. His voice was flat, controlled entirely without mercy. I need a full structural lockdown on Hayes Tower effective immediately, and I need federal auditors on site within the hour. Tell them to bring everything, financials, permits, every signature on every report for the last 3 years. Voss took a step back. You're overreacting, he said. This will destroy the company's reputation. The investors will survive an audit, Hayes said. They won't survive a collapse. He ended the call. Somewhere above them, the building hummed with the ordinary business of a Tuesday morning, oblivious to the lockdown already spreading through its systems, oblivious to the man standing in its foundation who had just decided to burn every shortcut to the ground rather than let it stand another day. Voss looked at the torn page still pressed against the crack, the red ink glaring under the stairwell light like a wound that refused to close. For the first time since Samuel had knelt on that marble floor, Gregory Voss understood exactly how much trouble he was in. 3 days later, the lobby of Hayes Tower filled with investors, press, and champagne glasses nobody had touched yet. A red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Cameras lined the edge of the room waiting for the moment a billionaire would smile and cut it. Outside, a line of town cars idled along the curb, engines, running drivers waiting for a celebration that was never going to happen the way anyone in that lobby expected. Voss stood at the podium instead, sweating under the lights, gripping the microphone with both hands. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice climbing back into its old polish. Today marks the culmination of years of visionary engineering and unwavering commitment to excellence. Samuel and Caleb stood near the front row, still in borrowed clothes, still unsure whether they belonged in a room like this at all. Emily had insisted. Hayes had insisted harder. Voss kept talking louder now, faster, a man performing confidence he no longer felt in his bones. Then Hayes stepped up beside him and took the microphone from his hand. Voss froze. William, what are you— Sit down. The room went still. Hayes turned to face the crowd, calm, unhurried, nothing in his posture suggesting a man about to detonate his own opening ceremony. I was supposed to give a speech today about vision, Hayes said. About legacy. About everything this tower represents. He nodded toward the main screen behind him. It lit up. Not a ribbon-cutting graphic. A structural audit report, page after page of red flags, followed by a scanned image of a small torn notebook page, a jagged X drawn in a child's hand. A murmur rolled through the crowd. 3 weeks ago, Hayes continued, an 8-year-old boy tried to warn this company that the foundation of this building was failing. He was ignored. His father, a former architect, tried to warn us as well. He was fired for it. Voss's face drained of color. William, this is not the venue. The concrete in this tower tested at 4,100 pounds per square inch. Hayes's voice did not rise. It did not need to. Specification required 5,000. Gregory Voss knew the difference. He signed off anyway. Cameras began flashing. He embezzled the difference in material costs, Hayes said, then falsified the safety reports to hide it, then destroyed the evidence a child brought forward and fired the man who dared to measure it. That's a lie, Voss said, too loud, too fast. I never... You told me yourself, Hayes said. In this lobby, in the boardroom, on a recorded line to my own security office an hour before this speech. Voss's mouth opened. No sound came out. 3 years ago, Hayes said, a different building collapsed under this same pattern. Samuel raised concerns before that collapse, too, in writing. Someone buried them and blamed him for the disaster instead. Samuel's hand found Caleb's shoulder, gripping it, steadying himself against a truth he had waited 3 years to hear spoken out loud. That was investigated, Voss said, grasping now, his voice cracking under its own weight. It was ruled an accident. Everyone signed off on it. Everyone signed off on this one, too. Hayes let the silence sit. Right up until today. Voss took a step back from the podium. You don't understand the pressure, he said, quieter now, almost to himself. The margins, the timeline. I did what any of them would have done in my position. The room heard it. Every camera caught it. A confession small and unguarded, slipping out of a man who had spent 3 years perfecting his own innocence and had just in front of every investor he needed admitted otherwise. The main doors opened. Federal agents moved through the crowd, calm, efficient, unhurried, in the way that only comes from absolute certainty. Agent Mitchell led them, badge raised, stopping directly in front of the podium. Gregory Voss, Agent Mitchell said, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and falsification of federal safety records. Voss looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the ribbon he had planned to cut in 10 minutes as the hero of his own story. This is insane, he said. William, call them off. We can fix this quietly. There's nothing quiet left to fix. Handcuffs closed around Voss's wrists. He did not fight it. He simply stood there, stripped of every title that had ever protected him, staring out at a room full of people who had applauded him loudly only minutes earlier. Caleb watched without expression, the same stillness he had carried for 3 long years, though something in his eyes had finally settled. Samuel pulled his son close. Neither of them said a word as the agents led Voss out through the same lobby doors he had once used to throw them both away. Investors watched in complete silence. Somewhere near the back, a reporter's camera kept rolling, capturing every second of a fall that would run on every screen in the city by morning light. Justice, it turned out, did not whisper. It roared. The red and blue light swept across the marble facade of Hayes Tower over and over, painting the granite in colors it had never worn before. Voss twisted against the cuffs. His tailored jacket rode up at the shoulders. 2 agents pressed him toward the open door of the cruiser, and his Italian leather shoes scraped uselessly against the curb, leaving 2 black streaks on the concrete. He screamed something about lawyers. Nobody listened. Samuel stood at the edge of the crowd with Caleb's hand in his. The boy's other hand still held the torn blueprint page, its red X faded but legible. Water had warped the paper years ago, folded and refolded until the creases turned soft as cloth. William Hayes crossed the plaza alone. He'd sent Emily ahead to handle the reporters. This part he wanted no witnesses to correct or soften. He stopped in front of Samuel first. I signed off on the reports, Hayes said. I never asked to see the raw data, not once in 3 years. Samuel said nothing. His posture still bent from years of scrubbing floors on his knees hadn't fully straightened. It probably never would. The system protected him, Hayes went on. Every board meeting, every budget line, every NDA. It was built to protect him, not because he was smart, because nobody with power ever asked the right question. He looked down at Caleb. Your son asked it, with a notebook and a torn piece of paper. Samuel's throat worked. He still didn't speak. Caleb tugged the paper free of his own grip and held it out, not to his father, to Hayes. Hayes took it carefully like it might crumble. He turned it over, once studied the faded red mark, then folded it along its old creases and slid it into his coat pocket. I'm keeping this, he said, not as evidence. The federal auditors have copies of everything already. I'm keeping it because I want to remember exactly how close I came to burying you both under my own building. Rain had started somewhere in the last few minutes, thin and cold, barely more than mist. Voss's voice carried across the plaza, thinner now, cracking at the edges. He was still yelling toward the cameras, toward the assembled press, toward anyone who'd point a lens his way. Nobody turned. Caleb watched him go. He watched the cruiser door slam. He watched the taillights pull away down the service road, past the chain-link fence, past the loading dock where his father used to push a mop bucket at 4 a.m. before the sun came up. Something in Caleb's face gave way. It wasn't a sob. It wasn't loud. His mouth simply loosened at the corners, the tightness he'd carried since the day Voss ripped that page from his notebook, finally letting go one muscle at a time. Samuel felt it happen through the hand still holding his own, a small, unfamiliar looseness. He knelt down to his son's height the way he used to before disgrace and silence had settled into their lives like dust. Caleb didn't speak again. Not yet. He didn't need to. Hayes crouched too on Caleb's other side, his expensive coat pooling against the wet concrete without a flicker of concern for the fabric. I have paperwork for you, he told Samuel. Not tonight. Tomorrow or whenever you're ready. Samuel finally found his voice. What kind of paperwork? The kind that puts your name back on the firm's letterhead. All of it. Full architectural control over the rebuild, starting with this tower and every project after it. Your name, not mine, not anyone else's. Samuel's hands began to shake. Not from cold. 3 years, he said. 3 years I couldn't get anyone to return a phone call. I know, Hayes said. That's exactly why it has to be your name, not an apology in a press release. Your name on the drawings where people can see it every single day the building stands. Emily appeared at the edge of the plaza, coat collar turned up against the rain phone still in her hand. She didn't approach. She simply watched the three of them from a distance, the way she'd watched Hayes pause outside a marble pillar weeks earlier, unable to name why it mattered. Behind them, the tower rose into the wet dark, its upper floors lit gold, its foundation finally scheduled for the repairs it had needed for years. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn notebook, its cover soft from handling its pages full of numbers only he had ever fully understood. He held it against his chest instead of hiding it. For the first time since the humiliation in that lobby, nobody around him looked away. The rain kept falling quiet and steady, washing the last of the dirty water from the marble where his father had once knelt. Samuel pulled his son into his arms. Caleb led him. Somewhere behind the fence line, the cruiser's lights disappeared around a corner and Hayes Tower stood in the drizzle, still standing, finally honest about what it was made of.
This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. Our daily struggles can sometimes feel just as overwhelming. I know how it feels to be silenced by people with more power. Have you ever had to fight back when the system was rigged against you? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories.